You wind your career down. How did that happen? How does your career, I'm always kind of fascinated by the decisions that are made, the conversations, the hard conversations that are had. What I remember being with you at Pocono, and I walked up to you and I said, neither one of us were having a really good afternoon. It was like a Friday or Saturday practice. And I said, man, I think this next year is it. And you were like, really? And I was like, yeah, I believe I'm about to be done. And you were like, And I mean, you were kind of taken aback by that conversation. I'll never forget that conversation we were having. And you were trying to contemplate yourself. You're like, I really don't think I'm even thinking about it. And I think you went maybe another year or two. So, like, how does that process happen for you?
Well, not 100% my decision. I was in Canada on a fishing trip with no cell service, none, zero. I was doing an appearance for Cessna. We'd go on this salmon fishing trip. We did it the last 4 or 5 years. And my agent, Rod, called me, and he left me a voicemail, which I was able to listen to. And he's like, hey, I really need you to call me. And I'm like, all right. So I finally got to where I get some service. And I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, the rumor is Kurt Busch is going to Ganassi, and he's taking Monster with him, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, my God, like, this is just, I'm like, am I understanding this correctly? I can't process it. And if you think back, there was Target had left, DC Solar deal had blown up.
Oh,
Chip had been through some some tough times, and I think he'd put a lot of his own money into the team. And so I just remember I finally got to where I could talk to Chip, and I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, Kurt's, I don't know how much money it was, but bringing this Monster money over, and he's like, I got to do what's right for the company, right? And he was, so I say that in that I don't know that I don't know that I ever would have just said I'm done. I think I would have rode it out as long as I could, right? Because I didn't know any different. Now, I say that because in hindsight, it just couldn't have went any better for me. And I think that anyone that raced like that for so long, that when it's first over, you feel like your life's over, right? Like, you're like, man, I don't know any different. Like, all I know is I'm going to Daytona testing. I'm doing sponsor appearances. You just don't know any different life. And I was really fortunate because I've watched friends over the past 5 years, 10 years that have stopped driving, be unhappy and not fulfilled. And I've watched them struggle, trying to find the next thing. TV gave me that thing, right? Like, where I still got to be involved. So to back up, it wasn't 100% my decision, but I have learned in life to always be happy with what you have, and not try to wish that you could always have like the next thing, or that something else can work out. And getting to do TV, it has let me still be involved. And I'm telling you, I wouldn't say there's no amount of money, because there probably is a certain amount of money, but I wouldn't go back and do it.
Yeah.
I can't, the commitment, the stress, everything that goes along with doing that every single weekend, I don't want to do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think I would agree with you. I wouldn't want to do it again either. We didn't know any better when we were doing it. Now that we know better.
You don't know any better.
Yeah.
My son, who is 12 now, he'll be 13 soon. He asked me, he goes back and watches races on YouTube or interviews with me. And every once in a while he'll come out and he'll ask me a question. I'm like, not sure where you got this question at, or like where you're heading, right?
Yeah.
But just the other day we were driving along in the car, our whole family is cruising, and he's like, hey, Dad, if you could go back in your career, what's something you'd do different? And before I could say anything, my wife turns around, looks at him, and she goes, he'd have fun. And I was like, I looked at her and I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, from what I remember, the last 10 years, it wasn't fun. She's like, I just remember you were stressed about sponsors leaving, or am I going to have a job, or what am I going to do? And I'm like, You're right. And it is fun initially when like we talked about when you first come along, and it's fun when you're doing well, but man, a lot of it isn't fun.
Yeah. The other 90% of the time, it's
terrible.
It's terrible. You make it terrible, right?
When you watch a race, or when you're calling a race, and you see the leader, you're like, I missed that, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, looks like Ryan Blaney this weekend, that long run.
Driving his car, passing people on the outside.
I'm like, damn, right. I'm like, I want to do that, right? But then I watched him catch, I won't call anyone out, I watched him catch somebody, and he had to have gotten lapped 4 times. And I'm like, I remember that guy too. Man, that is no fun at all. And there was a lot more of those days than there was the other ones,
You're right? Yeah.
And that's what I always look at. When I think I want to come back, I just watch a race and I watch somebody get lapped 4 times. I'm like, yeah, I'm good.
You know what? To that point, guys, Blaney, even in his post-race interview, couldn't help but not just rest in the victory of the moment, but also relish on the fact that the summer's been awful.
It was brutal.
Right. I mean, like, you could even see the agony from him, and maybe it was in a bit of a release, but at the same time, you kind of see exactly what you guys are talking about. It's not been a fun ride.
That's a good point.
I was standing on the back straightaway, and this happens almost every week, but this particular week at Martinsville, I'm standing on the back straightaway watching the drivers ride around in the trucks for the intro.
I hated that. Yeah.
They are miserable.
I hated it.
Is that right?
Yes. Well, they look if they're not, they damn sure look like they're freaking miserable. And I'm looking at that going, yeah.
I don't miss that.
No, yeah, that better you than me.
Then why did y'all hate that so bad?
It's the same thing every week.
It isn't that we hated the act of riding around in that truck. It was honestly, like to Jamie's point, you're gonna win. Let's just say if you're great, you're gonna win 20% of the time, right? So 80% of the time you're mad, you're frustrated because you didn't win, and everything is an obstacle to getting in the car and winning. Everything. An interview, riding in the pace truck, intros, responsibilities, and
hey, Matt Kinsa told me, because he did the 42 car, right, when Larson was out, and it was during COVID, and there was no one at the track, right? And he told me, he's like, Jamie, I would have raced till I was 200. He said if it was like this every week, he's like, it's unbelievable. He goes, you don't even get to talk to the team. He's like, you show up, you sit in your rental car, you put your suit on in your rental car, and he's like, you go race. He's like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. You don't even have to talk to your team.
You don't even talk to your team.
It sounds amazing.
That's funny.